Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. And could I have someone um, read verses 1 to 5 out loud? Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. But if someone could read verses 1 to 5.
Submission to the authorities. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant, and for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger, who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience.
Amen. So this passage establishes government. And obviously, I'd say in the last, it was always popular, but I would say since 2016, I'd say when Trump really got into the political scene, it got very popular. It became pop culture. Um, and I think there were a lot of Christians who uh, had a lot of opinions on it as far as politics, as far as the person that's in office. But I think for us as believers viewing politics or government, one thing is very healthy, and it's for us to perceive it as God given. Not the person, whoever it is. I mean the structure, the way it is. Anyone that's in government is there by God. Okay, look at the first two verses. It's a divine establishment government. So look at the first couple of verses. Look at verse 1, where it says, um, having been instituted by God. And then he says in verse 2, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed. Okay, so also in verse 4, it says that the civil magistrates are God's servant. Okay, and then he also uses the word diakonos, which is deacon. Okay, so a servant of God in verse 4. So remember this: politics equals is ministry, is equivalent to ministry. It's a form of ministry because when we think of ministry, we think of pastor, we think of missionary, we think of a nonprofit, which is true. It's just when we think of politics, that's what I'm saying. Like when we look at the TV and we look at politics, we don't really see that. But I want you to view politics like that. I want you to view government as far as people that are serving. Okay, ministry. Um, John Stott, a famous theologian, says those who serve the state, the legislators, civil servants, magistrates, police officers, social workers, even tax collectors are just as much ministers of God as those who serve in the church roles as pastors, teachers, evangelists, and administrators. So I want all of us to think of it like that. Again, look at verses 1 to 4, where multiple times he's saying these are servants of God. Okay, and if you know, Paul is writing the book of Romans as we're reading. And who is the emperor of Rome at the time? His name was Nero.
Yeah.
And it's arguably one of the worst emperors in Roman history, especially during Pax Romana, where he ruled with 200 years of internal prosperity and peace. But it's very similar to, remember in how God in the Old Testament calls King Nebuchadnezzar, how he calls him my servant, and he was a non-believer. Okay, so, but remember, it's position. Okay, so uh, when we think of government, think ministry. Okay, so when people, even non-believers, look at a specific politician and they have issues with this person, he or she, and their minds can't really grasp policies, how it affects them on a daily basis, but they do see their life, right? And they don't like it. There's something about that person's life that they don't like. Whoever that is, and I'm just being honest, in the last, I'll say, 8, 9 years, that's been more of the liberal plea. Like you hear more liberals talk like that, as far as uh, how someone lives. Well, and to be honest, I think there's validity in that, right? I think that's an honest plea, because again, if you view ministers as far as the church, as far as there needs to be some sense of beyond reproach, high level of morality. I would say it's the same thing with politics and government, in the sense of they're also ministers of God. Okay, now um, God has established institutions in the world for humanity to live by, and it's specifically for order. Okay, and the three forms of institutions that God has given, we cannot escape them. Okay, in the scriptures is first the family. It's the first institution that God made when He made humanity. This is before the fall in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. That the first institution of a family, of a husband, of a wife, two different genders, but having a sense of the ability to procreate and establish what is known as the family, is by God. There's leadership roles in it. Okay, another institution, the second institution that God started was we'll read this verse later, was in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, which was government. Okay, and government is essentially how to function a society when you have multiple families. Okay, and the third institution that God started was that of the church. Okay, this is in the book of Acts. So Acts chapter 2. So essentially, you have the church, you have family, and you have society, or when I say society, the state, government, and then God. These are all institutions that God started. Okay, and they're all in the Bible, and there's all all three institutions imply a disordered state within humanity. But if you have these institutions and they function as they were supposed to be, then you have order. Okay, so government and politics, and again, when people talk politics, remember there's layers, there's foundations to these things. The underlying foundation of politics is anthropology, or human nature. And the underlying foundation underneath anthropology is theology. So you ever hear, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, theology is the queen of the sciences. Well, it's true, because it's the ultimate foundation, the foundation of foundations when it comes to different fields of study. Okay? So politics, the study of it didn't really start with Aristotle. So around 2,400 years ago. Then you have economics with John Adams. That was like, 400 years ago. So again, they're very recent in comparison to theology. Okay, and the reason why I say politics, anthropology, is because anthropology is the study of man. But question, who is man? Who am I? Who are you? And the reason why is because depending on your view of anthropology, your view of man defines your view of politics, or what is needed, right? If man is by definition selfish, wicked, evil, then there needs to be restraints. There needs to be a sense of order for that nature. If man by nature is in control, sophisticated, says no to their desires, selfless, then you don't really need much restraint if that's who we're talking to. But I know every single one of us here knows our own hearts, looks into the world, and says, what you just said about man could be true, but is not true. Meaning that we are by nature selfish. Okay? It is a fight for all of us to be selfless. It is a fight for all of us to be humble. It doesn't come naturally. You have to fight for it. This is why Jesus says you have to die to yourself every single day because of your what? Nature. So, and guess what? If I can't put my own flesh to death, my own ego to death, my own desires to death, then guess what? I'm going to act on them. And if I act on them, there's a strong possibility that could lead to specific behavior, bad behavior. And if I keep with that specific state of being, it's going to lead to criminal activity. And if it's not just me, but it's everyone doing that same, I'm not putting myself to death. So I'm not submitting to the church, I'm not submitting to the family institution, then I'm dealing with government. You see that? And this is why we need restraints, because we don't do our due diligence as far as our own spiritual disciplines. Okay? So remember the three institutions that God has given humanity. There's the family. Okay? Children obey parents. The husband is the head of the wife. There's churches, and within churches you have eldership, you have pastors, you have congregants, and then you have the state, where you have civil magistrates that govern over their constituents. Okay? And remember, the very essence of all three institutions is order. Because we are by nature disorderly people. By nature. Okay? We are just like animals, but we're image bearers. If you took the image bearer, the rationality out of mankind, we'd be very weak people. Right? Animals would overpower us easily. Okay? They eat, they procreate, they sleep just like we do. That's the physical to the physical. But what makes us distinct is our rationality. But we still maintain that disorderliness also with our disordered nature. This is why we need structure. This is why we need order. When there's governments that don't do their job, and that do not do their job, guess what happens to society? Disordered. If you have a family that's not structured in the proper, disordered. If you have a church that doesn't have specific structure, disorder. Right? Look at 1 Corinthians. Right? This is what 1 Corinthians. You could clearly see Paul what he's saying. A church, the church of Corinth. When he's writing the book of Romans, he's in Corinth, right? Which is in Macedon. So he's the church of Corinth, disorderly fashion, disorder. The leaders of the church of Corinth were not doing their job. Okay, so the very essence of institution is to set order. If you're one of these people that you look at your phone, you look at the news, you look at your TV, and you get very frustrated because the world just seems very disorderly, right? You should want better families, better churches, and better government, because that's what God planned for humanity to be in order. Why? Because of our nature. From Genesis chapter 3, a disorderly fashion that happened from there. Okay? Any questions?
Well, when I first read this a couple of times, the word resist popped out to me because of what we went through during COVID.
Yeah.
And so the resistance, is blatant, and it's more like anti-God.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just it's like innately anti-God, but it just stems from our anti-God nature. But it's just funny to me that everything going on, it's like everything that like people that are anarchists, say resist, and then it says resist, and Romans 13 is ironic.
Right. So if you're a Christian and you're part of this, I saw a video on Fox earlier about the guy burning and shooting all the Teslas and he spray painted resist. If he's a non-believer, he's a non-believer. But again, if he's a believer, you have to deal with Romans chapter 13. right? And not only that, but by implications, I even spoke about this talk when we were going through Daniel, and Biden was in president, was president. I remember saying, if you don't like Joe Biden, you have to submit, right? Is because he's your president. I would say the exact same thing a couple years later with a new president that's different ideology, right? So, yep, it applies both ways. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but no, what's that, Kevin?
I was just gonna say, you can hear me?
I could hear you.
Yeah, my reception, like,
Oh, Kevin got left behind.
Why?
We'll wait a bit.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Lane.
Hi. How's it going?
Sorry, guys. Oh,
No problem.
there you go. All right.
Are those new shoes?
What's that?
Are those new shoes?
That was at a church before I spoke. That's
I see.
I always take a photo of my shoes before.
Okay, that way we'll remember.
Kevin will come on and off. I think he has connection issues right now.
And we know what that's like.
Yeah. But submission to government is submission to God. Okay, pretty much what we're talking about. Submission to government is submission to God, because the reason why is because the people there were ordained, would be allowed by God. Okay, those specific positions. Okay, so Daniel chapter 2, verse 21 says, he changes times and seasons, he deposes kings and raises up others. Okay, remember, we went through the book of Daniel verse by verse. One of my favorite books, by the way. But the book of Daniel, remember, Daniel, when he was 12 years old, was under the authority of the Babylonians, who he ideologically disagreed with, right? But you see, there was a diplomacy, a submissive spirit that Daniel had, right? So, and not just one, multiple kingdoms. Daniel was so he was probably there for about 70, 80 years that we know of, right? And he was there during the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire, right? So again, also, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, 14. This is Peter talking about, for the Lord's sake, Peter asked for every believer to submit for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Okay, so essentially what I'm trying to communicate is submission to government is submission to God. Because as we've seen from verse 1 and 2, what is very clear is those who are in government positions are ministers of God, ordained, put there by God. Okay, now there's typically 4 ways we could view the church-state relationships historically. There's first Erastianism. That's the state controls the church. This is from a Swiss theologian, Thomas Erastus, that came up with the idea that the state controls the church. There's also, second is theocracy, where God or the church controls the state. And I would say the Old Testament, this was the intent, by the way. Theocracy was the intent of God in the Old Testament. And when I say it was the intent of God in the Old Testament, remember how even before Judges, right, there was a progressive state as how, remember, people are disordered. And it was supposed to be God and the priests that were to be ruling and to set order for the people. And then there was this progression of constant disorderly fashion, even in the book of Judges, right? And then you have in then all of a sudden you have the Israelites crying for a king. And remember, this is about order. And then God was like, I don't know if you want this, right? I don't know if you want this. Well, So what essentially theocracy was the intent. Okay, what Israel wanted was a monarchy because the other nations functioned like that. We were talking about House of Saul. Trish, who's watching House of Saul? Sorry, House of David. House of Saul, House of David. Right? If you're watching House of David, what you could see is how a society functions. Right? And if you watch House of David, it's about Saul. It's about King David and his progression to being king. But essentially, remember, that's not the way God wanted it. He wanted to be the ruler. Right? And if again, the first 4 episodes, you could see Saul's mental health issues. You could see Saul's how all these emotions of corruption are ruining him, right? And this is why when it comes to being a monarch means a king. It's unhealthy. It's always been unhealthy, right? It's always been unhealthy. So look at the good guys. The good guys being the nation of Israel. If you want to know about the kings, just read First and Second Kings. First and Second Kings. Very few good kings. Most of the kings, and then they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and followed their forefathers. And then they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and followed their forefathers, right? And then very rarely, this is not the Moabites, this is not, right, the Philistines, this is the Israelites. Very rarely you'll have, and then there was King Josiah. And he followed the ways of the Lord, right? Very rarely, though. But my point is, it's not healthy for a human to have that much power and fame. It's just not healthy. What it does to a person. Okay? So, but again, theocracy was the intent. And then you have Constantinianism, and this is from Constantine. Essentially, this view believes that there's a compromise, that the state has more control over the church, but the state favors the church over everything else. Okay? And then fourth, you have partnership. And partnership is almost like an equilibrium between the church and the state. John Stott, he's kind of the theologian that put this together, believes this was the intent of Paul as far as partnership goes. Okay? But essentially, this is typically how church and state relate to one another. Okay? So if you're wondering, remember, if you are a person that loves history, you enjoy history, you enjoy something like this, like human nature. The United States politics is unique. You know, it was an experiment, right? It was an experiment. Like, if you look at nations and how they were doing things, everyone did what was monarchy, bloodline, right? And the forefathers were kind of tired of it and wanted something different, right? And they wanted something where you could base it on this. Okay, for instance, can someone read Isaiah? I don't know if you knew this. Isaiah 33:22. Can someone read Isaiah 33:22 out loud?
The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. He will save us.
Okay. So Isaiah 33:22. The Lord is our what, Kevin? First?
Judge.
The judicial branch. The Lord is our what? Next?
Lawgiver.
Lawgiver, the legislative branch. The Lord is our what? King, the executive branch. So 3 branches of the U.S. government based upon Isaiah 33:22. Did you guys know that?
Something like that.
How do you know that?
So, what's that?
How do you know that? Like, I know it makes sense, but I'm just wondering, is it connected there, like,
No,
with one of the...
This is real. The forefathers wanted to create a government based upon biblical principles. So what I'm saying is not, like, this is. So they base the 3 branches of government that you see today is based upon Isaiah 33:22. You ever see how people say America's a Judeo-Christian nation? This is what they mean by the foundation of it. Okay.
I didn't know.
So you have God is our what? Our judge. you have lawgiver, and you have king. Okay? The problem with monarchy, with a monarch, is a monarch would have all three. The monarch would be a judge, would be a lawgiver, and would be a king. And that's too much power for a person. Way too much power for a person. What if the king made a decision that was unlawful? Right? It happened all the time. So now the thing is this: you have the judicial branch, you have the legislative, you have the executive. Now you have separation of powers between the three of them. Why do you have separation of powers? What did the forefathers say? Jeremiah said,
Checks and balances.
checks and balances. The heart is deceitful over all things; it is desperately wicked. That's not mine. That's all of our hearts. So, if my heart is desperately wicked, how can I be trusted as a monarch? If this is why they had the whole 4 years, only 2 terms, and that's it. George Washington could have implemented being a monarch, but he didn't, because they understood this, right? So essentially, a monarch can call a war, right? But a president can't. A president can tell the army what to do, but a president can call war. That's Congress. You see that? So the power is now distributed. Okay? Because at the end of the day, power corrupts. The flesh corrupts. We can't be trusted. So think of humanity. Think of people with a deceitful heart. How can we, just think of it philosophically, how can you create a system where all of us, let's just say all of us live in civil order, but every single one of us has the ability to be president. All of us has the ability to contribute in the laws in a governmental position. Because remember, if you were in a monarch, you couldn't, right? You had to be from the bloodline or a church ruler before. Right? This is 2,000 years of European history. This is the way it was, right? But what the U.S. wanted to do is they wanted to avoid all the corruption that's happened. So distribute power as much as possible. You can go down the list: the French Revolution, right? What if you think of why John Locke even wrote? Remember, they got the articles. So remember, this is Article 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution, all from Isaiah 33:22, right? So essentially, John Locke, it was during the around the Renaissance where he was young, and remember, King Charles I was beheaded, right, because of treason, and it was this frightening moment of England English history, as far as how can we survive as a society, and he wrote down in an article, and that there was between John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Thomas Hobbes, who had different views as far as human nature and relating to the government. John Locke, after hearing the beheading of King Charles I, scared him and said, "This is not healthy. This is not healthy." So the forefathers, when they read this from John Locke, they were able to. They said, let's give this a try, and wrote something called the Constitution of 7 articles. And what's the first 3 articles of the Constitution? This right here. Right? So, what about paying? What about the church not paying taxes? Well, Ezra chapter 7 verse 4. Right? I can go on and on and on and on as far as Bible verses and how American politics works. We're going to go to a Bible verse, I guarantee you. We're going to go to a Bible verse. And I'm just being honest, a lot of Americans, they don't know this, right? You'll hear it was based upon Judeo-Christian values, but it's like, what does that mean? An image bearer? No, they're very direct biblical passages, okay? So, essentially, remember, government, my whole point, let's drop United States politics. Government, the very essence of it, is God-given. God-given. Okay?
You wouldn't like think that right off the bat with how toxic our society is now.
What's that?
Like, you wouldn't think that based on our toxic society and the the atrophy of education.
Yeah, yeah. And remember the essence of this machine, if you want to call it. When I say machine, I mean the way the United States politics works, right? As far as the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, three branches of government, all that. The very essence of that society was supposed to be Christian in nature. It was supposed to be, right? The what changes, what ruins this whole system, is when your view of human nature changes, where you view humanity as good, moral, virtuous. Anyone can come through the southern border. We don't need guns. That mindset, what you're presupposing, is man is by nature virtuous. I think man is an image bearer, right? But there's the corruption that happens. Therefore, I need accountability. You need accountability. We all need accountability. Checks and balances. Okay. Can someone read verses 3 and 4? Verses 3 and 4. So remember, we have the government as God given, or government is established by God, and what's the responsibility of the government? Okay, verse 3 and 4. Can someone read that out loud? Verse 3 and 4. Is that Romans 13? Go ahead, Trish.
Isaiah, or are you on Romans?
Romans 13, verse 3 and 4.
I left. I'm still on Isaiah. So I have to go back and find it.
For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. I just can't, my mind can't believe Paul is writing these words when Nero is king, or Nero is the emperor of Rome, and he did a lot of things that were the opposite of what Paul is saying here. But regardless, we take Paul's words and we look at the responsibility of the government, and the responsibility of the government is twofold. Any government, okay, but biblical, okay, so we're going off a biblical government based upon Romans 13. The very essence of government is to uphold good and to restrain evil. Okay? Is to uphold that which is virtuous in a society, uphold it. We live by these principles. We live by this. This is good. Also, is to discourage, is to restrain, and is to punish evil. Okay? Is to punish evil. For God, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Okay, they're a terror to bad conduct. There should be some sense of punishment, and I think this might correlate with chapter 12, verse 19, where it says, "Vengeance is mine," says the Lord. Remember, I'm saying like sometimes we want to take it into our own hands. Well, the government should be doing that. That's the government's job, as the hands of God. Okay, should be to punish evil. So, for us, it's a little different because we have cameras and police officers, and in every city. But say somewhere like in England or France, or even Rome, during what you saw was beheadings. What you saw was hangings. What you saw was someone getting their hand cut off or something. But the reason why they were very severe in this time when it came to punishing crime, as far as how it was done, is because there was no police officers. There were no cameras. So as a result, you have to make this display to your people, your constituents, as shocking as possible, so no one will steal and people will be in order. So if some kid wants to take an apple, make it known. If you take that apple, you're not going to have a hand next time. Okay? But this was just the way it was done as far as how a government is to deal with evil. Okay? When evil persists in a nation, and you see crime and it's normative, it's a sign of a very weak government. That government is not doing its job. Okay? It's not good for you as a citizen, whatever nation and time that you're living in, to feel unsafe. If you ever walk outside and like, is it okay to walk out at night? That's not a good that's not good policy, not good government. What's a politician should be thinking, how could my people be safe at night, safe 24/7, versus you're always in fear. Okay, that's a good that's a good politician. Punishes evil. Okay, Isaiah chapter 1 talks about. Maybe if someone could read that out loud. Isaiah chapter 1. Verse 24, Isaiah chapter 1, verse 23 to 24. I'll read it. Isaiah chapter 1 talks about kings that were not doing their job. And he says this, how the faithful city has become a whore. She who was full of justice. Righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your best wine mixed with water. Your princes are rebels and companies of thieves. And he says, everyone who loves a bribe and runs after gifts, they do not bring justice to the fatherless. And the widow's cause does not come to them. Okay, so in essence, injustice is normative now. Murders are normative now. The pleas of the widow, normative now. You're not listening. You're not doing your job as a government official, essentially. So they're ministers too, but they're not doing their ministerial duty. Okay? So if you look at crime in the United States, I would say in the last 5 years, it's very concerning. Very concerning. Right? And remember, what is the essence of government? Is to punish evil and to restrain evil. Okay? The second responsibility of government is to uphold good. Is to uphold that which is virtuous. Okay? Back to Romans chapter 13. And Romans chapter 13... Paul says, then what good is it? And you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for good. Okay? For good. So there's a duty in which man is to uphold virtue, uphold justice. I think one of the first cases you see, like as far as us, our minds, what are some cases in the Bible that you think of a monarch, you think of a government official upholding good? Any instances that come to mind? Are there any instances in the Bible or just in life where there was a monarch, there was a government official, a king, someone that upheld virtue in a society, and you saw it?
I say Solomon the baby.
That's what I had in mind. 1 Kings 3, right? So Elaine said Saul and the baby. So this is, remember, there's two mothers.
Right.
There's babies, and both of them sleep, and one of the mom, she rolls over and she sleeps on their baby. They wake up the next morning, and she looks around. She's like, they look the same. There's no camera. So she switches the baby, right? And obviously, a parent, a mother, You know your baby, right? We all have certain ears, nose, right? Hair, right? Birthmark, right? And the other mom's like, this is my baby. What are you talking about, right? So they go to Saul, who is the king of the nation of Israel. Remember, what did Saul pray for? Wisdom. Why? To rule, to bring order to the nation of Israel. And he brings out a sword and he says, well, I have a solution. Let's get the baby that's alive and let's cut it in half. And the real mom, freaked out and says, no. And the pseudo mom says, oh, fine. And Saul saw the heart. So what he did is he uplifted truth. He uplifted virtue. Okay, so that's a good example of a king, of a government official uplifting good for their constituents to see. Okay. Any other illustrations or examples that you?
Of a virtuous king?
Yeah. Not a virtuous king, but an act where a king showed virtue in front of their people.
Cyrus with the Cyrus cylinder.
That's good. It's funny. Cyrus is biblical, but that part is not biblical. Is not biblical, but no, you're right. Like King Cyrus, he's considered the great of greats. Like, like when this person, the great, right? Alexander the Great. The first great was Cyrus. He's considered the great of greats. Even Alexander the Great, he says, no, let's leave the great to Cyrus. But essentially, King Cyrus, he upheld religious freedom, which is also a biblical concept, and civil rights, looking after the downcast, the marginalized in our society. First in world history that we know of on the Cyrus cylinder, the very end of Daniel chapter 5. Right? So the people in Persia knew about it. They knew about that, and they loved King Cyrus for that. Even till today, Jews in the nation of Israel, they love King Cyrus because of that. Okay? So again, he's someone that upholds virtue. Okay? Also, King Josiah and Uzzah, they removed the idols in First and Second Kings, and they upheld honor to God. I think it's in. Can someone read out loud? You don't have to turn there, but can someone read out Proverbs 31, 8-9? This is about King Lemuel. Can someone read that out loud? It's a good illustration. Proverbs 31, 8-9.
Open your mouth for the speechless, in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy.
This is a king saying that. That's his heart, right? That King Lemuel is a good example for a nation to live by, right? One person that upholds good. Okay, he upholds good. So, based upon these two principles of government. So what is the whole point of government? Based upon verse 3 and 4, is that to uphold good, uphold that which is virtuous, and to discourage and to punish evil. Okay? So if you are a citizen of a nation, what you want with that mindset of those two principles is to be, it doesn't matter your age, your height, who you are, is that if you abide by the laws of the lands, you will be taken care of. And if some injustice happens to you, right? Some injustice happens to you, the government will step in and come to your aid. That's a good society. That's a good nation. But if you're in a society where you contribute, you do good, but all of a sudden you're penalized for it, right? Or there's some home invasion and nothing happens, that is not a biblical government. They're not doing their due diligence as ministers of God. Okay? So the two primary roles of government right there. Okay, notice how it says this though in verse 4. And he says, for he is God's servant, but if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. What does that mean? For he does not bear the sword in vain. What do you think that means?
Just using force for no purpose.
Well, I want you to think of a sword. A sword was, and remember this. What was the first sword ever? If you ever think of, like, I wish I had. I love swords. I don't have any around me right now, but think of a sword. When was the first sword ever made? Think of it, like your mind, like when. It's a piece of metal, so it takes a rational mind to create it. It took humanity some years to do so, right? But think of it. When was the first sword ever mentioned? Ever
Did
mentioned?
the Romans have swords?
Romans had swords. The Macedonians had swords. The Persians had swords. Let's go way back. Babylonians had swords. The Israelites had swords. Okay. Genesis chapter 3. After the fall, remember, there was an angel of the Lord. Remember, he had a sword that was what? On fire. Moving around. Ever in world history. It's the first concept of the sword. Right? But what was it used for? Defense. So a sword could be used for defense, but also for punishment. And it's the job of the government. It's the role of the government to use the sword in wisdom. Okay, so yes, it's talking about cutting someone's hand off, cutting someone's head off, but these are not good people. They're bad people. They violated the law. Okay, I'm going to read to you the first, or the origin of government. It's in Genesis 9, verse 6. Capital punishment right here. Okay, this is God. I will require a reckoning of the life of man. He says this, Genesis 9, verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. Let me read that to you. This is God. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his image. Essentially, if you take a life, your life will be taken. Because that's an image bearer that you have violated. That's Genesis 9, verse 6. Right? Genesis 1 and 2 is about being an image bearer of God. But that image bearer theme continues. Right? There's something very sacred about a human as far as their life. Okay? So this is the first instance of capital punishment. But it's how? By the sword. Okay? So if you have discussions with people about capital punishment, is it good? Remember, this is God. Okay? God was in Genesis 9, verse 6. As far as capital punishment, okay? So the sword here is in reference to capital punishment, okay? Can someone read verses 9 to 6? 6 to 7. 6 to 7, we'll close here. 6 to 7.
Wait, what was the first instance of the sword again?
Genesis 3, verse 24.
Oh, 3:24, okay.
Genesis 3:24. But if you think of it, like, what I'm saying is like it's spiritual. It's real, but when I say it's spiritual, there's no way a man made that. Like humanity was just created. Depending on what view you have as far as who's there, was it Adam and Eve and just Adam and Eve? Was it Adam and Eve and other humans that God made it from the ground? Whatever it is, humans were not able to make a sword. Right? So my point is angelic, it was God, but that's the first concept an understanding in world history of a sword. But the very essence of the context was it was defensive. We don't want you eating this fruit. Don't come here. Right? When I do this, I mean the sword was moving around on fire. Okay? Verse 6 and 7, can someone read? Of Genesis, Romans 13.
For because of this, you also pay taxes. For rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them. Tax to whom tax is due. Custom to whom custom. Fear to whom fear. Honor to whom honor.
Does what translation was that, Virginia?
I guess the NIV.
It doesn't say.
New American.
It doesn't.
New American Standard.
Okay, it doesn't say for the sake of your conscience. No.
No.
Oh, I said 6 to 7. I apologize. 5 to 7. That's my fault. That's my fault.
Wherefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake.
Yeah, that's it. So when it comes to government, and so remember, so verse 1 to 1 to 5 or 1 to 4 was pretty much about the role of the government, and verse 5 to 7 is about the role of the constituents obeying the government, how we're supposed to comply with them. Okay, so in verse 5 you have for a clear conscience sake, when a Christian violates the government, I think there's a searing of conscience. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. There is something in us as far as having a good conscience when it comes to following the law, right? And I think this is a Christian duty for us. Mentioned many times, okay, in the scriptures, but there is something where we follow the law. We follow the laws of the government if the government is walking in line with the scriptures. If they're doing their due diligence of upholding good, and if they're doing their due diligence of punishing evil, then there is something on the citizen to comply with the government, to comply with the policies that are there. Now, this is ideal. Okay, when Paul is writing this is ideal. And when I mean this is ideal, hypothetically. And the reason why I say hypothetically is because we know in reality that's typically not the case. Back to what I said about 1st and 2nd Kings, the good guys were not being good kings. We're not being good monarchs of the nation of Israel. Right? So therefore, you had a lot of people under that land, a lot of Israelites, probably with bad conscience. Their conscience were seared. They were not at peace. Okay? So that being said, if you're in a situation where you live in a land and your government is not doing their job, they're probably doing the opposite. They're probably upholding evil and discouraging good. Okay, if you live in that society, how do you function? How do you live your life? Okay, or in essence, is submission. Because remember, the biblical mandate is for us to submit to the government. Right? That's a biblical mandate. But what happens if the government doesn't do their job? Is submission to government absolute? Right? No. There's something in the Bible called civil disobedience. Okay, and we see this throughout the Bible. We see this in history, and I think we've seen this in the last 5 years in the U.S. What I mean by civil disobedience is that, remember, we've established that government is from God. Okay, church is from God, family is from God. All three institutions, because of their corrupt nature, our corrupt nature, has the ability to not do their job well. So, for instance, what does a child do if their parents are dysfunctional? What does a church do if their leaders are dysfunctional? What does a civilian do if their government is corrupt? Okay? And this is where all three of them, we follow God's rule. We follow God's law. Because the reason why all three institutions are there is to uphold the good of God. But as we've seen, not all that doesn't always happen. So, not the family, not the church, because we're talking about government right here. If you're a Canadian, if you're a United States citizen, and your government is not doing its job, there's something called civil disobedience that happens. Meaning that we, as a citizen, know the rules of God. The government contradicts that. We follow God regardless. That's what you're supposed to do. Okay? For instance, do you remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? In Daniel chapter 3, right? What was the whole thing? Was that they did not bow down to that giant statue in Daniel chapter 2. Remember? The golden head, right? The silver the four kingdoms, right? And they did not bow down, and as a result, guess what? They were thrown to... But remember, they did not bow down because there was a violation. There was a violation of what they believed about God and government. Contradiction, right? But they civilly disobeyed. Acts chapter 4, you have Peter and John before the Sanhedrin. Remember, to Jews, in Jewish culture, we're talking about taxes here. You didn't just pay the Roman tax, you also paid the temple tax. Right? So essentially, you okay, Lane?
Yeah, okay.
Get some water. Oh. You get some water, Elaine. So in Acts chapter 4, you get some water, Elaine. All right. All right. Do you guys remember Acts 4, where Peter and John are before the Sanhedrin? And the Sanhedrin said, don't preach the gospel. Remember that? So you have the government telling people, don't do this. And then you have Peter and John saying, it's a violation of our conscience. It's a violation of what we're called to do, especially the book of Acts, right? And he says, we follow God, not man. So, civil disobedience. Okay? One more example, biblical. Exodus chapter 1. In Exodus chapter 1, you had the midwives and you had Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh said, get rid of all these Hebrew boys. So if it's a boy, kill him. And the midwives, what did they do? They knew in their conscience this was not right. This was murder. This is a violation of Genesis 9:6. And what they do? They had to lie, right? And as a result, the boys survived. But the whole point of it was that there was civil disobedience that happened. Okay? So we can go on and on and on and on about civil disobedience, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know if you know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, or like if you want to use this illustration of COVID, that a lot, in 2020, a lot of churches would use this civil disobedience, as far as the government of California saying don't meet on Sundays. Well, for us, that's what we do, right? I don't know I forgot the percentage, but the percentage where suicide and depression just was at an all-time high. But again, we're social creatures, and this is a need. We must do this, right? And some churches said no, but it was an act to them of civil disobedience. It was a violation of what God called them to do. Okay. So paying taxes even though we might not like it, is a duty for us as believers. So for us as Christians, we're called to pay taxes and to honor the king. Okay, and this is from the very last part of verse 6 and 7. So verse 6, so from verse 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, it's essentially the role of the government. Verse 5 to 7 is the role of the citizen in relationship to the government. And there's two duties that we have to do: is number 1, pay taxes, and number 2, honor the king. Verse 6, for because of this you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers, again, ministers of God. Okay, not the pastor. Those in government are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Okay, so for us, we are called to pay taxes. What's the very heart of taxes? What's the very essence of taxes? It's for the government to do their job. And what's their job? To uphold good and to discourage and punish evil. Okay, so what does that look like practically? A good police force. What does that look good practically? A good military. Okay, National Guard, ambulance, on and on and on and on. Okay, first responders. Okay, so government is necessary, but taxes are necessary in order for government to function. Okay, in order for government to function. I think twice Jesus talks about taxes. First in Matthew 17, and then another one in Matthew 22. Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Okay, so essentially, this is an affirmation of paying for taxes. Okay, and we can get into a whole different discussion as far as what happens when they overtax you and it's unreasonable, and this is the American Revolution all over again, right? How it started. And let's close here in verse 7. Pay to all what is due to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, and here it is, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. So essentially, honor the king, respect the king. 1 Peter 2:17, Peter says for Christians to show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, and he says honor the emperor. 1 Peter 2:17. It's so funny because you have Paul saying this, and you have Peter saying this, and who killed Peter? Who killed Paul? Nero did. Okay? Nero did. So, this is very powerful, and I would say very applicable for us living in the 21st century in the United States, here in Canada too, as far as how politics is when I say honor and respect the king. Okay? Honor and respect the king. And the reason why I say honor and respect the king is, again, in 2016 to 2017, I've never seen that much hate towards criticism, making fun of, mockery towards a United States sitting president. You don't have to like him, but there is a command to honor. Okay? Let's flip it from 2020 to 2024. I heard the exact amount of hate towards another guy. Right? And what I'm saying is the left was throwing rocks at Donald Trump. The right was throwing rocks at Joe Biden. And I'm saying you don't have to agree with everything they're saying. But there is a demand to honor, respect. Okay? Within my heart, I always try to live every day, and this is the way I live. I try and I fight for it. Is I don't want to develop a heart of hate. I want to be able to look at a president, look at a politician, look at a scenario, and analyze the ideas, analyze what's going on. Versus, you're going to hear my opinions of why I don't like them first. If I were to be all logical, it is called an ad hominem argument. An ad hominem argument is where you attack a person versus their policies. So when I hear people, it's like, they just start, they can't engage with policy. It's always, I don't like the person, I don't like the person, I don't like the person. Okay, I'm just saying, it's healthy. You're at a place in life where you're able to analyze the ideas around the person versus the person in of themselves. Okay, because you can't think clearly. It clouds your judgment. Okay, but regardless, every single one of us is called to honor, called to respect those who are in authority. And frankly, I would take this principle and apply it to everyone, not just those who are in authority, but to everyone. I want to know how to respect and honor the homeless person. I want to know how to respect and honor the Muslim who I disagree with as far as their beliefs and right, but be a respecter of all humanity, but especially the king. Okay, because this is essentially what Paul is talking about here. Okay. So, why should Christians submit to the government? Before we close, it's right. God established the government. Also, it's wise. We all need to live. We all need to live away from evil and to live for good. And last, it's fair. Right? We have a just society due to it. Okay, now I'm going to close here. And you're welcome to ask questions after this because we're just over our hour mark. But if you're a Christian that's like, I'm a Christian, but I'm not for politics, that's unchristian to say. And the reason why, because God is all about politics and Jesus is all about politics. And guess what? One day, Jesus will be your president. Jesus will actually be your monarch. He will be your king. Isaiah 9:6, what does it say? For unto us a son is born, right? And it says, the government will what? Rest
upon his shoulders.
That's Jesus. Okay, you fast forward to Revelation chapter 20, verse 4 to 6. It talks about his millennial kingdom, and he's ruling. So guess what? He's our politician. So when I hear people say I don't like politics, you just don't like what's going on and people, and maybe, right, we unable to grasp ideas or don't like the ideas or on and on and on. There's things that we don't like. But government in and of itself is how we have order. We have to have government. Right? We have to have government. Before, in 1607, before they reached Virginia and established Jamestown, they were just natives. And it was one tribe defeating another tribe, defeating another tribe, defeating another tribe, defeating another, and on it went. Right? And that's called disorder. Right? There was no sovereignty. What we need is order. Okay? And this is why, and again, why is there disorder? Jeremiah 17:9. Deceitful hearts, corrupt hearts, because of Genesis chapter 3. I need order, we need order. And you want to be in a good society, but you want to be a society that upholds the standards of God. And that's the way God intended it to be. Okay? So, any questions about this?
When you actually break it down and you go into the word, it's just, the word is, unfailable and just amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, the thing, let me just finish this one, like the follow-up, is just, because it's like when, the one part in the New Testament where like Jesus opens up the word to the disciples and they fully understood. I feel like that's happening now. Like I'm not saying it's the same. I'm just saying it's very similar. Or it depicts something similar.
In what way, Kevin?
Just in seeing I mean, it's more than illumination. It's kind of like you see the the glory and the authority in God. When you see all these provisions he's already put into place, and then it's playing out whether you agree or disagree, or whether you choose it or not. Like, he still instated it, and it will forever be. And the proof is in the word, and it's like, when you break it down, it's like there's no way you can combat it or contest it or resist it or like anything. It's just it's been done. Like Jesus said, it's finished. I mean, those words are very true. Like it is finished.
Yeah, no, I would say a lot of people don't know how interconnected the scriptures are or theology is with American politics, because it's very, very interconnected. Yeah, that's why
Well, I think
Thomas Jefferson, yeah, I think he even said that, like, and him, he's not even a Christian, he was a deist, but like saying that it was meant for a religious nation. It was meant to be that way. It was all because of human nature. That's why, right? And that's why, like, I'm just being honest, guys. Typically, when you see those who are more liberal, they have a very unfixed view of human nature. Man is good, man's okay. And you see, you hear about like a progressive couple been going to Afghanistan to prove that terrorism is not real and that Muslims are beautiful people, and then they end up getting killed, right? Because again, there's something wrong with us, right? And you see more conservatives, they believe that man's nature is fixed. There's a fixed state, and it's not good. There is good, but it's not purely good. And this is why there's something called borders and restraint, and it's okay to carry guns and to have a southern border, and yeah, order, right? So, yeah. Any questions before we close?
Nope.
No. All right. So, we're going to meet next week, and we'll finish Romans 13, okay? And then that's next week. And then the week after, my friend Nate, who's here, he's gonna speak for us on Thursday. That's the following week, okay? So we'll make sure we're all here for that, okay? Not me, him. All right?
What day is that?
Not next week, the week after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's the 10th.
Yes.
Yep.
So next week I'll finish Romans 13, and next week Nate will speak. You excited, Nate?
I'm pumped. Yeah.
All right.
There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah. All right. Nate's a dear friend of mine. We went to Israel, and fun, interesting stories. Yeah, with
it's the best.
churches in Los Angeles. We can go off on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.